Okay, so we're really right at the bottom of Tzadik Dalet on the base, and the last three words are Hahu Tavcha. It was this butcher, the Omer Leila Chavre. He told his friend, who wasn't really such a good friend, because they were actually in a fight with each other, and he told him, coming on to Tzadik Amar Aleph, I have a Pisces Minori. Had you made up with me, and we would be on good terms again, Miloi Safiloch, Mishor Shalpetem David Esmael, I would have invited you to the grand barbecue that I made yesterday afternoon. And boy, would you have had good, juicy meat. Amalei, so his friend, who was not so friendly with him, said, you think I need you for good meat? Achli mi shufri shufri. I ate from the best of your cow. Amalei, Minolach, where did you get it from? Amalei, don't you know? The Zavin Ploini Ovid Kachavim. You sold some of that meat to a guy, the Safali, and he fed it to me. So I got my delicious barbecue without you. Amalei, so the Sheikh had said, Treyavdi, I actually had checked the two cows, and one of them was kosher that I kept for myself. Who treifaham, and the one that I sold to a guy was a treifa. So now the question is, they didn't call it out of the shuk, but it had to be a place where they announce in the shuk if there's a treifa. Because if they didn't, you're never allowed to take from a guy. Elamai, it's a place where they do announce, and it must be that this shoichet didn't tell anybody. Now the question is, since there seems to be a breakdown in the system, maybe now we should ask her all the meat that day from the guy. Amar Rebbe, no, absolutely not. B'shvil shoyte zeh, she'aza shaloika hagid. Because this shoyte sold meat improperly without announcing it. Anu nesar, kala makulin. We should ask her all of the butchers in the city. Rabbi Latame, Rabbi obviously holds the Amar Mekulin v'Tafche Yisrael. If Roiv of the butcher stores and the Shachtim in the city belong to Eden, Basar Animsa Biyara Vitkachavim, even if you find meat by a guy, mutter, it will be mutter. Let's look at Rashi's comments and how Tosfos interprets them. She'asa shaloika shemochar treifa lo'ovid kachavim lemochar b'mekula. He sold meat to a guy to resell. The hit the he fooled his friend. The lokach min ovid kachavim, and that caused that he should buy treifa the meat from the guy. So adu nasar bitmiya melikach basar ayoyim min ovid kachavim b'mekulin. Are you going to tell me because of that, no goyish butcher store is allowed to be purchased from today? Hoil v'rov tavchi Yisrael. V'baltas rov tavchi Yisrael may be fakir. We look Rebbe because he did something stupid. It doesn't break the entire system. Zok Toisus. Anu neser kala makulin. Mikulin heim oisam oivete kechavim shaloichim baser min tabach listaker boy. These are meat retailers who purchase meat from the Jewish shachtim, who are the wholesalers. The Ka'amar, and what Rabbi is saying, the Ilonu Lesar Likach Basar Ayoim, even Mishar Mekul, or maybe not even. The Ilonu Lesar Likach Basar Mishar Mekul. For this guy, we know he has strafe, we shouldn't eat from him. But from all the other butcher stores in the city, even though they belong to Goyim, you should be able to buy from. V'lochish shekemoishe machral azeh treifa l'moicher b'mekulin alva b'shalo yikrizu kein mocher la'acher ma'moicher b'mekulin. Are we going to be choshish that just because this fellow did something stupid and he sold to one goyish retailer treifa, that means we have to be concerned that he sold to other retailers as well? Like a moishe mocher azeh tabak treifa. Just like this butcher was a Russia Who are in other Jewish butchers are Rishayim that would sell tarfus to other goyim? Ze ein lachosh. For that one not choishish. V'sharu shar makulim. And all the other makulim and mutter. The only guy that you cannot buy from today is the guy who we know purchased tray for the meat. But everybody else, you can eat from them because the fundamentals are still there. Hoyel v'roiv tafchi Yisrael. Levad meyahu ovid kachavim. Dezav nomine. So that's the first nusach in Rebbe. Zog to Gemara weiter. Ikadamri, there was another version of how it went down. Amar Rebbe, mipnei shoyte zeh, the ichvin l'tzu'ur l'chavri. This shoychet didn't mean it when he said that I sold tray for me to the guy. He was just saying it to make his friend feel bad, to make his friend feel like he ate nevela or treifa. But avada, it's not even true what he said. So b'pnei shoyte zeh, the ichvin l'tzu'ur l'chavri, onu neser kala mikulat. Zokt Rashi, the ichvin l'tzar l'chavri, the sheker diber. He was just lying just to make his friend upset. And look what Rashi says over here. Onu neser yoyv es a makulun shabeir v'likach bosser min ha'ovet kachavim af hayoyim mutarin hoi v'lo yichrizu. You're allowed to buy meat from anybody today. There was no achraza. The assumption is there was no treifa at all. And this butcher just lied to make his friend feel bad. Zok to Gemara. Time of the ichvin l'tzu'ur l'chavre. So this comes out of Chomer. Because the only reason why we're saying you're allowed to buy meat everywhere else today, and you don't have to be worried that there's treifa meat in the market, because he's not neman, and he just meant to make his friend upset. Halavachi. What if we knew, in fact, that one goyish vendor bought treifa from this guy? Also, in this nusach we're saying that it would be also to eat from the rest of the vendors today. That's not true. But Tanya we learned, Rabbi Yomer Mekulim v'Tafchi Yisrael Basar Nimtza B'Yad Ovid K'Chavim Mutter. So you see that you go Basarayv. What do we care if there was some meat? You can go Basarayv. Zok Gemara, you go Basarayv when there's no Ischazik Isura. Shiny Yachad Ischazik Isura. Here's a Rashi. We know there's a treifa out there somewhere. We'll be Samech on the Roiv to tell us there's no treifa. But once we know there's a treifa there where we cannot be Samech on the Roiv, now it's a Chumrah. Zok Rashi, the Ischazik Isura, the treifa. V'zelai Nizarba, this fellow wasn't Nizar. Shari Machar Loivit Gechav, this lowlife sold it to a guy. V'yishlocha Shemachar Heimena Loivit Gechav Marbe, and therefore once he's a lowlife, you have to be choshid that he sent it elsewhere. Again, this is not midaraisa. This would be a chumrah be'alma. Okay. Zok to Gemara vayta. Freit to Gemara, we have another problem. Amarav basar kivan shenis alim minda ayin aser. Once you take your eyes off it, it becomes aser. Zok Rashi, there was a lapse in its supervision. Even if you know it was on his table. Also, Sheman is for the vela, it might have been swapped out with a nevela. By whom might have it been swiped out with a nevela? Who would have done it? So let's see a couple of lines, and it'll become very clear as to what's happening. Meisvei, Rabbi Omer, Mekulin, V'Tafchi Yisrael, Basar Nimtza B'Yarev T'Kachav Mutter. Frek the Gemara, if you hold Basar Shen Solomon Ayin Aser, so if you find meat by a goy, if you go into a goyish butcher shop and you find meat there, who cares if there's a roy? Basar Shen Solomon Ayin is also. This meat was in the butcher shop of the goy. It was not under supervision. According to Rav, how could you eat it? Zok to Gemara, there's a very big difference. Nimtza biyad ovid kechavim shayni. Basar shenesalam in the ayin doesn't mean it was by a guy, and we're afraid the guy swapped it. We're not afraid the guy swapped it. And if it was by a guy and it was being supervised by a guy, there's no problem of basar shenesalam min ayin. You know what the problem of basar shenesalam in the ayin is? Zok Rashi, nimtza biyad kechavim shayni, shehoyze v'cheskes hamishtamer. The meat is becheskes mishtamer even by the guy. V'ulay shachta. He didn't shecht it. V'treifel and machulay. And we know that the Yiddish shaychit would not have sold to trade for the meat, l'moich kan, to sell here in the city. Aval basar menuach is a problem. You know why? Not because we're concerned about a guy swapping it. We're afraid a bird came. Now, based on this halacha, this is a big misconception in the belt. We thought even if you left it by a goy, it would be basar shenesalam min ayin. In fact, from Rashi, you see it's not basar shenesalam min ayin unless it was completely abandoned, and the concern is a bird might have swapped it out. Now, there's a famous story. I don't know if it's an urban legend, but there's a famous story about a yid who was on a plane, sitting near a guy, and they were schmoozing, and the meals came, and the Yid opened up his meal, and he was schmoozing with the guy, and then he had to go wash. So he went to wash, and when he came back, he realized that his meat was left unattended, and he didn't eat the meat. So the guy asked him, why aren't you eating your sandwich? And he said, well, because there's a Jewish law of basar shenesalam min ayin, and now this is basar shenesalam min ayin. The guy said, wow, your Jews have a wonderful Torah. In fact, I wanted to taste some of your corned beef. So I took a slice of your corned beef and I replaced it with a slice of my corned beef. And now I see your God protection. So that story must be an urban legend, because that wouldn't even be halachically basar shenesalam min ayin. Because the chashash is only if there's no guy. If there's a guy watching it, clearly from our Gemara we see that there is no chashash of basar shenesalam min ayin. I heard a shir about basar shenesalam min ayin once. So this is one point that the Maggid shir brought up, and the other point that he brought up is that we don't see it yet in our Gemara. I'm sure eventually we will. Is that basar shenesalam min ayin applies to beef? It does not apply to chicken. But that I just remember from the shir. I'm sure we'll be able to see a raya to that eventually in the Gemara. Zok the Gemara weiter. Now we're challenging this halacha of basar shenesalam min ayin. Toshma teisha chanuyos kulan meichos basar shchuta. Now this next blot is the most yisoidistic blot for hilchos taruvos. Anyone who learns hilchos taruvos, he wants to get smicha. It's this blot that's the cornerstone of the halachos of taruvos. Teishech menuyos, kulan meichos basar shchuta, the achas meicheres basar nebet. There's 10 stores in a plaza. 9 stores in this plaza are kosher meat stores. 1 store in the plaza sells basar nevela. V'lokach me'achas mehen. Somebody went into a store, came out, he has now a package of meat, but he cannot remember which store he bought from. So the halacha is sveika yosser. There you don't go basaroid. You don't go basaroid because there the suffix was noilat in the store. In the store, it could be kosher, it could be treif. That's not a right. But if a nifta, what if you just found a package of meat in the parking lot, assuming there's no problem of basar shenesalam min ayin, you just found a piece of meat in the parking lot. Now there's 9 out of 10 chances that it came from a kosher store. 1 out of 10 chances that it came from a treifa store. There halach achar. So the problem is, what do you mean v'nim halach achar? According to Rav, there should be a problem of basar shenesalam min ayin. What do you mean if you found it in the parking lot? You can go basaroid. That's Gemara hachanami. This again, we have to reiterate, is benim to be araybit kahav. If you saw a guy in the parking lot with a piece of meat in his hand, there you can do samech on the right. But if you found the meat completely abandoned, according to Rav, this would still be basar shenesalim minayin. Zok to Gemara, Tashma. Another challenge to Rav's halacha of basar shenesalim minayin. Tashma, matzah ba basar. What happens if you found meat? What was the case? Zok Rashi, matzah ba basar. It's a mishnah tahiris. You're in a city and you found in the city a piece of meat that was sitting there. So if you found meat in the city, the halacha is chai. If it's raw, halach acharoiv tabach. You go bas a roiv tabach. If roiv of the shachtim in the city are Jewish, you could assume that this piece of meat is kosher. But ve'im avushal, what if it's prepared already? Now, any guy could have cooked it. Halach acharoiv oichle basar. You see all the oichle basar in the sea. Any one of those is part of the pool of people that could have cooked it. If roiv of the people that cook basar are Yidden, then once again you can assume it's kosher. What are we talking about over here? A piece of meat that you found abandoned on the floor. That's basar shenesalim minayin. So forget being precious for roiv, not roiv. It's regardless also because of basar shenesalim minayin. If we're telling me that you found the meat by the guy possessed it, so then bevushal halach acharoiv oichle basar. If it's cooked, you look at all the oichle basar in the city. Why would you do that? The next thing, either oived kachavim naketle, either Yisrael naketle. If the guy has this meat, why would you assume someone else cooked it? For sure, the guy would have cooked it. And if a Yid found it, then the Yid cooked it. So where are you going, basar roiv oichle basar? It had to have been abandoned, and you found it on the street. And if that was the case, then it should be usher anyway because of basar shenesalim min ha'ayin. Zok to Gemara, hacha b'may askinan ba'aymed v'rayayim. It's speaking where the guy found it on the street. The guy took it to his house to cook, and all the while someone's watching this guy. So therefore, the only problem is, did the guy cook it properly? But there is no problem whether or not there's an isser of basar shenesalim minayin. Big doich, Zok Rashi b'aymed v'rayayim. Mishasha nafal miyara adam l'sham u'ba'od miyara bailam l'nasar. When it was in the hands of the bailam, it wasn't asher. But if haya oivd kachavim, the nim to be oivd kachavim muter. So it's funny. If roiv oichle basar are goyim, then it's going to be asher. Here, a guy took it. Who cooked it? A guy. So it's very no, or maybe forget a yid cooked it, and the guy just has it now. So that's what it could have been. So could be you found it cooked, meaning it was by Yid the whole time, and then the guy got it, and you watched the whole time. Maybe the Yid cooked it, maybe the guy cooked it. We don't know. So you go basar roiv, but it's definitely not a case of basar shenesalim minayin. Tashma, let's have a different. This is the seifa of this same mishnah, where it said if you found it in the city. What about nimtza b'gvulim? What if you found it? I'm sorry, it's not the Sefer, it's a different Mishnah. Sefer of a different Mishnah. The ratio of this Mishnah is if you found meat in the Beis HaMikdash. In the Azara, though the assumption is that it's going to be from a carbon oil. But Nimbus of Gvulim, what if you found meat in the regular cities of Eretz Yisrael, not in the Beis HaMikdash? Avarim, if it's complete limbs, then the velos. And Rashi says, why do we assume it's an avela? Because that's how people would dispose of nevelos. They would chop it up by its limb and they would throw it out that way. So if you found a full limb abandoned on the street, you need to assume that it's an nevela. Katifais, but if you found it, cut it into proper slices, then mutarais, because that's the way someone would only prepare kosher meat. But once again, it's nimtza. Why is there no problem of basar shenesalim minayin? If If it's speaking, once again, were you watching it the whole time? A varim de velois amai. Why would you say that the varim are in the velois if you were watching it the whole time? You saw the whole time. So why would you say that it's an Avela? It's not just a bandit on the street. Zok to Gemara, Midi hu time elul Rav. Who are we trying to fanfare? We're trying to fanfare Rav Shita, right? Rav is the one who told us that Basar Shenis Alam Ayin is also. Rav has a different shot in this price. Itmar Allah on this very brisa, Rav clarified. And you know what he said? Mutarish b'shum nevela. Even when it says nimchsa b'gvulid chatichais mutarais, it doesn't mean you're allowed to eat it because it's basher shenis alam and ayin. You're not allowed to eat it. It just means we don't need to be choshid that it's nevela. It won't be tummy. That's how Rav learns. Rav mutarish b'shum nevela. The whole difference between Avarim and Chatichais is whether or not they'll be Tumas Nevela. But you're not allowed to eat it anyway because of Rav Shita that it's Basar Shenisal Liminayin. Zok Gemara Viter. The Levi Amar Mutarish Bachil. Levi argues and he holds there's no problem of Basar Shenisal Liminayin, and therefore he holds that this meat would even be mutter to be eaten. Zok Gemara V'had Rav. This halacha that Rav taught us, that Basar Shenisal Liminayin is Asr Lav Befershit. He didn't come right out and say, Rabbi Sai Basar Shenisal Liminayin is Asr. No, there was a story that happened. The status, I'm sorry, with the Rav have a Yosef and Maver the status. Rav wanted to cross the bridge or the ferry of the river that was called Ishtatus. So Rav was getting ready to cross the ferry. He saw someone, the Hava Chaver, and let's turn on to Amid Base. The Hava Chaver Resha. It was at a port because there's a ferry there. So at the port, he was washing and rinsing the head of an animal. Nafal minei. He dropped the head in the river. So he needed to get it back out. So Ozil Icy Silta, he took a net, the long handle, Shada, he put it in the river to bring back the head, and Asik trade. What do you know? 2 heads were captured in this basket. Obviously, there was another head drop. Omarav Avdi Nami Hachi. Is that how it works? If you put one head in the river, 2 heads pop out? Of course not. It must be that this second head came from a different place. And therefore, Asridi the Heller, he told him both heads are usher, because who knows where these heads came from. So this is where we would have understood these are Basar Shadu Solomon Ayin. You have a head, you don't know where it came from, you have to assume that maybe an Erev put it there and it's the Vela, and therefore you're not allowed to eat. Amar Rav Kahana Barabasi Larav. Kahana Barabasi told Rav, the Surah Shchichi, the Terah Lo Shchichi, yes, there's a second head here. But who said that the likelihood is that it came from an animal that was usher? Maybe it came from an animal that's mutter. So why should you assume just because there's another head here, automatically that it's usher? Especially since Rashi tells us earlier that this was in the city of Rav Tafchei Yisrael. So if it's Rav Tafchei Yisrael, we should be able to assume that that head is kosher.
Yosy.
Yeah. Yep.
I understand. The question isn't about whether it's from a kosher animal or not. It's busted and
When I say kosher animal, I mean an animal that was shechted properly.
Right, but even if it was, the problem is of basar shenes
So that's the whole point. Rav Kahana and Rav Ashi are telling Rav, what are you worried about? You worried about maybe it was swapped out? All of the heads in this city would be kosher heads. And we disagree. with your new chumrah of Basar and Salam and the Ayin that maybe some bird brought it from another city. That's the whole point. They're arguing on the whole premise of Rav. So Zok to Gemara, Amr Lahu, the Surah Shchichetfei. There's more Isser. Rashi told us earlier that we're speaking about a city where Roiv Tafki Yisrael. Zok Rashi, the Surah Shchichetfei, Rashi says over here, I believe Rashi says over here, yeah. We'll get there in a second because it's in the port city. Oh, the Gemara is going to say. V'chim mechlala mai. What's the big deal of mechlala? Because remember we said Rav didn't say black and white. Basar shel Solomon and Ayin is also. He just answered these heads. But that's a pretty good raya that he also Basar shel Solomon and Ayin. Because what other chashash could there be? Zok Gemara, no. Parvasa da'ov tikachavim havai. This was a goyish port, and Vibalt was a goyish port. In this particular area, there were more goyim, and that's why maybe he was machmer. So maybe it's not a general hashash. Chomer of Boshish and Solomon Ayin that an oirei flew it in from another city. In this particular case, this local area where the head was found was roiv goyim. And therefore, maybe you don't look at the whole city. There was Roiv Tafki Yisrael. This localized area was Roiv Goyim. Teda, I'll bring you a right. The Ka'amalahu, the Yisur Shchichet. Rav responded to them, it's Yisur Shchichet. How could he have said that if it's Roiv Tafki Yisrael? The teretz is this immediate area, the port area, is the immediate port area is what's Roiv Treifa. Let's see Rashi. It's going on what we said earlier. The army lav shitma. We said Rav's halacha that we say from Rav. We didn't really hear Rav say it. Based on the psak that he gave, we assumed that that's what he holds. The Gemara wants to know what do I care how you figured it out? A halacha is a halacha. So the Gemara, no, because there is a room to dispute our conclusion of what Rav said. Lav b'sherishet b'mabed perusha l'chlola b'shab b'shmeinimina. The kivin shedis alam aser mida aser l'rosh nimtza. Mashani, the Gemara answers no. There would be a possibility to neutralize the raya. Mashani ika b'nayu daleka l'misbach hamil sekulahai. The ika l'meimar b'roiv tafchi Yisrael moide the mutter. Maybe Rav would be moide in the case of roiv tafchi Yisrael. The ikal member b'roiv tafki Yisrael moeded the muter v'hacha b'shum the parvasa the oivdik achavmama. Here, maybe the reason why Rav was machmir was only because the port was a goyish port. The Rashi's Nobel is a port, u'shechichi the yisura tvei, and that's why there's more issue there. But in the regular place where it's not shchichi the yisura, we wouldn't be worried that an oirev would bring it in from far away. So, Frank the Gemara. Now that you're telling me Rav was makban and bashish and the Salam Adayin, how did Rav ever eat meat? Rav heichel also misra. How could he ever eat meat? He had to have his eye the whole time. That's more precisely. Shaita, he was only able to eat meat where he would eat it right away after it was shechted. Rashi says. So right away he was shechted it, and right away he ate it. He wouldn't buy processed meat. Look, Rashi. Le'olam Rav Eineminei, says a Toysvis. Le'olam Rav Eineminei, le'hoyachal adaktik mikan the Sover Rav the Bosher Shel Solomon Ayin Aser. Why didn't we bring the raya? Why did we bring a raya for the fact that he asered that head? Why don't we just bring a raya for the fact that he had a minig only to eat meat that he was right there when it was shechted and he ate it right away? Isn't that a good proof from what Rav did? Zok Gemara, that wouldn't be a proof. The Dilma Roiv Tafchi Oiv Dikachav Ba'Yisham. Seeing him do that wouldn't prove anything because maybe in that city that he did it, it was Roiv Tafchi Oiv Dikachav. So therefore, the only way you could isolate that it's only because of Boshish and Salman Ayin possibly is from the story with the two heads in the river. Zok to Gemara Vayter. Iba Yisema, or there's another way for a Rav to eat meat. B'tzayra b'chasuma, if it's sealed if it's sealed and stamped, like we have our meats, they're packaged and sealed with a plumber, so then he could be reassured that this is the same meat. Or a third option, binami bisimda, if it's carved in a specific way. He would cut his meat into triangular pieces. A highly unusual way of cutting meat. He could be assured that if he found this triangular piece of meat there, it likely was not swapped out with other meat. We had another option yesterday, and that is if you send the whole gid and it's cut up, carved, the way a yid carves it, that would also be a raya that this is the same meat, and there wouldn't be a problem of basar shel Solomon. Zok to Gemara, Rav Havaka Ozul Lebei Rav Chanan Chasne. Rav was going to visit Rav Chanan, his son-in-law. Chazri Mavra the Ka'asar Legapei. Now, in order for Rav to get to his son-in-law, he had to cross a river. He had to take a ferry across. And today was his lucky day. Because whenever I pull up to a ferry to cross, the ferry always just left. And I got to wait till it goes and comes back, and it's an hour wait. Rav said, as he walks to the port, the ferry was just coming in. Perfect timing. They'll unload and he'll get right off. So Rav saw that he had perfect time. Those are the Ka'asalape. Omar, look at that. Mavra Ka'asalape. It's going to be a good day. Yoima Toiva Lagav. There's probably a Yom Tov happening by my son-in-law that Hashem made it that my access should be so easy. The Gemara is going to shortly discuss. I thought you're not allowed to be ma'aynin and you're allowed to be ma'aynin with the samanim. It's a good omen because the ferry's coming my way. The Gemara will deal with it. Anyway, Ozil come above. He came to the house of his son-in-law. Ka'asei oidik v'biza tidasha. He looked in between the slots of the window blinds to see what was going on inside. He peeked in through the keyhole, so to speak. He saw an animal that was hanging there, seemingly abandoned, not being watched, not being supervised. Tarif Abava, the Shver knocks on the door, and Nafak Kula Al Malapei. Rav is the guest, the illustrious guest that's coming. The entire household emptied out to greet Rav, and not only that, the kitchen staff as well, also tafchanami, which means now this meat that's left in the house would be basar shena Solomon. Because of that, loy olim Rav ein mine. The entire time, Rav was focused on that meat, so it shouldn't become basar shena Solomon. So they all hugging him, and he's like distracted. And his son asked him, Shver Leben, what are you looking at? He says, I'm looking at the beef. I don't want it to become basar shena Solomon. Amalahu ichu hashta sifisu lahu isura livnei baras. If I wasn't watching, you would have actually fed me Isser. Let's see Rashi. Ichu hashta, Kleimer, im b'shmiraschem hashta sifisu lahu isura livnei bati. Shalom to Menechem. If it wasn't for me, this would have been a disaster. And you would have fed everybody Isser. You would have fed everybody Basar Shena Solomon. Zok to Gemara, Rav Behubis. Rav didn't eat. No. It wasn't Basar Shena Solomon, and Rav himself was watching. My time, why didn't he eat it? Imishum Ialumi, it's because no one was watching it, but we know that's not true. He watched it himself. Elo de Nafish. You know why he didn't eat it? He punished himself. Since he said improperly that since the boat's coming my way, there's going to be a good party here, that was wrong. And because of that, he refrained from eating meat. But that's not true. Because what he did didn't violate any halacha. Because via Amarav, Polnacha she'ena keliezer ever Avram, uchiyonis and bin Shol, eino nachash. Eliezer Ibn Avram said, if the girl comes and offers to drink, then we're going to take her. If not, we won't take her. So Eliezer was going to make a decision based on his nichush whether or not to do it. It's the same thing with Yonasan ben Shaul. He made up a simon. If they tell him to come, then they're going to be mitzvah. They'll go to Milchama. If not, they won't go. That you're not allowed to do. Make a decision based on nichush. But all Rav said that this is a good sign. He didn't decide, okay, because of that I'm crossing, or because of that I'm not crossing. So there's no problem pointing out a nice sign. The problem is acting on it. So Rav wasn't violating anything. So why would that have been a reason for him not to have enough? Ella zok Gemara sudas or reshus. It was not a sudas mitzvah. It was a sudas or reshus. Rashi defines that as it was a wedding, but it was a wedding of an Amoritz. Bas Talmud Chacham la Amoritz. It was the wedding of a Bas Talmud Chacham to an Amoritz, and that's not a sudas mitzvah. And Rav wouldn't need for Rav loy mishani misudas reshus. Rav only ate from a sudas mitzvah. He wouldn't need from a sudas reshus. Zok to Gemara, Rav badik b'mafra. Rav would actually make note of whether or not the bridge came, the bridge didn't come, or the ferry, if it arrived, if it didn't arrive, and he would actually make decisions based on that. Rashi points out, if he would make decisions based on that, that is a problem. We're going to get there in a minute. Rav Badik Amavra, Rav would make decisions based on those omens. If the ferry arrived as he got there, Shmuel Badik B'Safra, Shmuel would open up a Sefer Torah, and depending on what pasuk he'd open up to, he would rely on that, almost like the Goyer bro. And Rabbi Yochanan Badik B'Yanuka, Rabbi Yochanan would ask a small child, "What did you learn today?" And based on what he learned, based on what the child said, Rabbi Yochanan would take that as a simon of how he should have. Zok to Gemara, Kulu Shani, the Rav, all of the years that Rav was alive, he was the Rebbe of Rabbi Yochanan. And when Rabbi Yochanan addressed Rav, have a concept like Rabbi Yochanan, L'kedam Rabbeinu Shebebavel. This letter is being sent to the great Rebbe of Bavel, referring to Rav. Hinach Nachshe, when Rav died, to Rabbi Yochanan now had to ask his shilas to Shmuel. But he didn't address Shmuel with the same reverence. He wrote to Shmuel, to my dear friend in Bavel, not Rebbe. So Shmuel said, what am I, chopped liver? The Rabbi, no? Is there nothing that I taught you that I'm worthy of being addressed as a rabbi? Therefore, he actually figured out the calendar for the next 60 years, and he sent to Rabbi Yochanan the calendar for the next 60 years. That's worthy of him being called a Rebbe. Rabbi Yochanan said, nah, I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed with just because you made a calculation. So then, Kosav Shadalei, Tleiser Galmni, Sveki, Trefasa. He sent 13 type of camels. He sent him the halachas of their treif. Rashi says it means suffix treifus and sveke oifes to meim. He sent him a list of oifes that it's a suffix if they're kosher or not, halachic items, and that qualified. That qualified. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan said, now that I have a Rebbe in Bavel, my new Rebbe Shmuel, Amar Isli Rab in Bavel, and therefore, Ezel Echasha. Now that I have a new Rebbe in Bavel, I want to go visit him. Before he wanted to make this journey, he wanted to know if it was the right thing to do. So, as we said earlier, Rabbi Yochanan would ask children, and from what they responded, he would take out a guidance. So he said, tell me what you learned today, Cheder. He learned that pasuk with Shmuel Meis. Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, it must be that I'm not supposed to go visit Shmuel, because Shmuel, and there's no need for me to visit him. But Velohi, Shmuel was very much alive. Lo shachav Shmuel. Ella Hashem gave Rabbi Yochanan this signal. Kadosh Baruch Hu didn't want Rabbi Yochanan to be matriach on the journey to Shmuel. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Bayis Tinuk v'Isha, Bayis Tinuk v'Isha, which means if after you have a business deal, after you buy a house, you make a good business deal, or after you give birth to a child, you make a good business deal, or after you marry, you get a good business deal, that's a good simon that you should continue on doing business. Even though it's not mamash nichosh, it is a simon you could follow. That's if you did 3 business deals after buying a house, or 3 good deals after a tinnik, or 3 good deals after an isha. That's something that you could rely on. Yaakov said, Yosy v'enenu v'Shimon enenu v'Spinyamin tikachu. 3 in a row is a problem. You say that Basher Shen Salim and Ayin is Aser. What if there was meat hanging on a string? Is that called Basher Shen Salim and Ayin? Amalei told him, Alti Shaita v'Chruzin. Don't be a Shaita about Chruzin. Harays a Simon. The hanging on the rope is itself a Simon. So of course it wouldn't be Basher Shen Salim and Ayin. Ikadami Amar Vun Amarav v'Chruzin harays a Simon. If it's v'Chruzin, then it's a Simon. Rav Nachman Narda, Nikla Lagabe Rav Kahana, Lefum Nahira. Rav Nachman from Narda met Rav Kahana in front of the river when B'Mali Yom Kippur. They met on the Yom Kippur. Asi Urve, some ravens came that had in their mouths meat. Shadu Kavdi V'Chol Yosy, they dropped a package with livers and kidneys in it. Now, is this kosher? This is a classic case of basar to the Salam and the Ayin. Amalei. So what happened was, Kana said, "Shkoil, take it, but echel you're not allowed to eat it, and you are allowed to eat it." Clearly, he disagrees with the Rab's halacha of basar to the Salam and the Ayin. Shkoil v'echel, because ha'idna the ter shliach tvei. Erev Yom Kippur, we learned there's many animals being shechted. Right, we learned that's why Yosef is Benoi. You have to be very careful with Yosef Benoi on the Erev Yom Kippur. So therefore, since there's so many mutter animals being shechted by Yidden, we can assume that it's kosher. The Ter Shliach Tvei. Itbadlei Karkasha Beidana. He lost the kishka of an animal amongst the barrels. So when they found it, Asel Kabed Ravuna, when they found it, the question is this Basher Shel Salam and Ayin? Amalei Rav Huna asked him, Islach Simna Begaveh? Do you have a simon that we would be able to verify that this was the same one that you lost? Amalei Loi. Islach Tviyasayna Begaveh? But when you look at it, do you recognize it? So he said, Amalei, yes, I do recognize it. Okay, Zil Shakal. Then you can eat it because you're a Talmid Chacham and you're Nemon with Tviyasayin. Rabbi Chanina Chuzah Itber Le Gaba de Bisra. He lost the back of an animal, piece of meat. Again, also Kamed Rav Nachman Amalei Islach Simon Abagavei. You have a simon Amalei Lot Islach Tviyasayin Abagavei. You recognize it Amalei in Kain Zil Shakal. Vita, you could take it. There's no isser of Moshe to Salvanayim. Rav Nazim Barabai Itbad Le Kibura to Tachlasa. He lost a spool of tchelas. Now tchelas needed a hechsher because it was hard to discern between tchelas and kala ayin, kala ilam. Maybe it was artificial dye. So unless he was able to identify that it was his, you wouldn't be able to use it for your tzitzis. So Azula Kabed Rav Chisda, Amalei Islach Simna Begavei, Amalei Loi, Islach Tviyaseina Begavei. Do you have at least Tviyaseina? Amalei in. If Kain Zil Shkoil, I was you could take it. Amarava, I used to think Simna Adif with Tviyaseina. I used to think a simon is more powerful than Tviyasayin. Why? The Hamadrina Navedasa Besimna. Because you could give back an Aveda with a simon, yet you wouldn't give back an Aveda with Tviyasayin. Turning on to Daf Tzadik Ches Amar Aleph, or Tzadik Vav Amar Aleph, that is. But you wouldn't give back an Aveda with Tfiyasayda. But has the Shmasidal Adishmaisa, but now that I see for a dover Isser Heter, you do give it back. Amina Tfiyas ain't Nadifa. Tfiyas is stronger. Because by Mominist, you could say Chazal or Misak and you give it back with a simon, even though it's Shvach. But by Isser Heter, Chazal wouldn't be able to be Bekel. But the fact that you can be Bekel by Isser Heter with Tfiyas, it's a raya that it's a very good raya. Dileite Mahapi. If you don't say Tfiyas Ayin is reliable 1,000%, Suma Mutar B'Ishtoi, Uvle Adam, Heich Suma Mutar B'Ishtoi, how could a blind man ever be allowed to live with his wife? He has no simon on her, he can't see her. Uvle Adam, Heich Mutar B'Ishtoi Balayla. Or at night where you can't see, how could you be with your wife? It must be El Tfiyas Ayin in the color. Must be because you recognize her voice. That's Tfiyas Ayin. That's not a simon. So you see clearly that Tfiyas Ayin is a good siman. Let's just make a run for the Mishnah. You should know the ilu also betray. But Amri Planya the high simne kadal nafsho like a tidlay. One of two Adam come and say, we saw somebody kill somebody. The guy who we saw, we don't know his name, we don't recognize him. But he had a beauty mark here and a pimple here, and he had a broken arm here. They gave very good simanim. That wouldn't be enough to kill this Ritzayach. But Vilu Amri Islan Tfiyasayim Begavei. But if they say we recognize this person as Ruben, then Katlinule. So you clearly see that Tfiyas Ayin is a much more powerful identification in the Simon. Omar Bashi Teda, I'll bring you another ayah. If you tell your friend, do me a favor, when you go to Baltimore, I want you to send a message to a guy. Which guy? The guy with the red ears, a pink nose, and blue glasses. So if I said that, you can't be sure if you'll find the guy. Maybe there are multiple people with those odd features. But if I tell you to go do me a favor, go over to Yankel and tell him the message, you'll know exactly who to go over to. So clearly Tfiyas Ayin is a much better form of proof and of identification than the simon itself. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we were zeicher to finish Daf Tzadik Hey, and Baruch Hashem tomorrow we will learn Daf Tzadik Vav.
Okay,
have an awesome day.
Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.